Have you ever wondered why some truths feel like they are hidden behind locked doors, buried so deep within the mind that approaching them feels dangerous? It is not because those truths are small or insignificant. It is because they threaten the very identity the ego has constructed. The ego, fragile yet loud, survives by creating a story, one in which it is always right, always justified, always in control. And so the shadow steps forward, not as the enemy, but as the silent guardian of the truths that could shatter that story too soon. The shadow is not darkness for its own sake. It is the veil that shields what the conscious mind cannot yet bear to face. In the language of archetypes, she is the shadowed flame, a force of depth and concealment, holding within her a fire that can illuminate or destroy. She is not here to harm, but to protect. She hides the wounds that are not ready to be touched, the memories that would overwhelm if seen all at once, the desires that would tear apart the illusions of safety. Her concealment is not betrayal, it is timing. Without her, the unprepared soul would drown in its own unprocessed pain, yet the ego fears her. It fears what she hides, because it knows that within those hidden truths lies a kind of liberation that will render the ego powerless. The ego loves its throne, even if that throne is built from lies. It thrives on recognition, on control, on the illusion that it can master life by mastering the image it presents. To the ego, the shadow is an intruder, a saboteur whispering inconvenient truths. It fights her, represses her, labels her as dangerous or wrong. But this conflict is not a war between good and evil. It is a necessary tension between two forces within the psyche, the force that sustains the self-image, and the force that insists the image is not the whole self. Without the ego, there is no sense of identity. Without the shadow, there is no path to the truth of that identity. Imagine a woman who has spent years perfecting the mask she wears. Her smile is practiced, her words carefully chosen to avoid rejection, her choices shaped by what will maintain approval. She is admired, perhaps even envied. But beneath the mask lies a quiet ache, a memory of the parts of herself she left behind to maintain this image. The girl who once spoke without hesitation, who laughed too loudly, who loved without calculating. Those parts live in the shadow now, waiting. They are not gone. They are hidden, because the ego decided that to reveal them would invite pain, shame, or abandonment. The shadow does not release these truths to those who demand them without readiness. She is not impressed by force or impatience. She waits for the moment when the conscious self is strong enough to hold what it once rejected. Sometimes this happens through crisis, when a betrayal rips away the mask, when loss strips life down to its bones. Sometimes it happens through quiet awakening, the slow realization that living as a performance has become unbearable. Either way, the encounter with the shadow is never gentle, because truth rarely is. But in that encounter lies the doorway to sovereignty. Sovereignty is not achieved by killing the ego. It is achieved by teaching the ego to serve truth instead of resisting it. When the ego surrenders its obsession with image, it no longer needs to fear the shadow's revelations. The truths she guards are not meant to destroy, but to transform. They strip away the false, not to leave one empty, but to make space for the whole self to emerge. This is why those who have faced their shadow carry a different presence. Their eyes do not flinch at pain. Their voice carries weight without shouting. They no longer perform for approval because they have met the parts of themselves that needed none. For the listener, the question is not whether the shadow hides truths from you, she does. The question is whether you are willing to face the moment when she decides you are ready to see them. Because when that moment comes, it will not feel safe. The ego will protest, it will bargain, it will try to convince you to look away. But if you can stand still, if you can listen to the truths it fears, something remarkable happens. The fear dissolves, not because the truth is smaller than you thought, but because you are larger than the fear. The shadowed flame will not hand you her fire without testing whether you can hold it without burning yourself or others. She will strip you of false titles, false loyalties, false securities. And when she is done, you will not be who you thought you were. You will be more. But tell me, if the shadow revealed the truth your ego has feared the most, would you be willing to keep looking, or would you turn away? The moment the shadow begins to lift her veil, the world can feel suddenly unstable. Familiar relationships seem strange. Words that once felt comforting now ring hollow, and the mirror reflects a face that feels both why. Ours and not yours. This is because the truths she reveals are not polite. They do not knock before entering. They arrive like an uninvited storm, rearranging the furniture of your inner world, washing away the foundations you thought were permanent. And yet, hidden within this chaos is a strange kind of order, the order of what has always been real. The ego's instinct in this moment is survival. It will try to restore the old balance, to paste the mask back into place. It may tell you the truth is too much, that you are overreacting, or that nothing needs to change. These are not lies meant to harm, they are reflexes meant to keep the known world intact. But the known world is exactly what the shadow intends to transform. Jung once observed that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. This is not a gentle observation. It is a challenge, a call to choose awareness over comfort. Within the feminine psyche, this choice carries a deep cost. The woman who accepts the shadow's truths must be willing to lose certain roles, certain identities that once defined her worth. The good girl who never disrupts harmony, the pleaser who earns love through sacrifice, the perfect partner who hides her needs to protect the relationship. These identities feel safe because they earn predictable rewards, approval, praise, belonging. But they are bought at the price of self-abandonment. And the shadow knows that as long as these roles remain unchallenged, sovereignty is impossible. The archetype of the shadowed flame carries with it both danger and initiation. Her danger lies in her ability to ignite what has been suppressed. Her initiation lies in teaching you to hold that fire without fear. She does not simply hand you self-knowledge, she forces you to experience it. To feel the rage you buried when you were told anger made you unattractive. To mourn the dreams you silenced because they were impractical. To acknowledge the attraction you denied because it threatened your image. Each of these emotions is a door. Each door opens to a room the ego locked long ago. The ego fears that walking through these doors will undo you. But what actually unravels is the false self, the collection of shoulds, roles, and performances. And here is the paradox. When those false layers fall away, you do not become smaller. You expand. The self that emerges is not a stranger. It is the self you have always been beneath the compromises. This is why facing the shadow changes the way you walk into a room. You no longer enter seeking permission to exist. You enter knowing you belong, even if no one else approves. This shift is often misunderstood by those who remain loyal to their masks. They may accuse you of arrogance, selfishness, or being too much. But these accusations are simply the voice of their own egos, threatened by your refusal to play the old game. When you no longer hide behind the image, you expose the unreality of that image in others, and some will resent you for it. The shadow prepares you for this by showing you the truth first in yourself, the parts that you once resented, rejected, or envied in others. She shows you that what you condemn outside is often what you cannot yet accept within. The work, then, is not to destroy the ego but to realign it, to teach it that its job is not to protect an illusion, but to protect the truth once it has been revealed. This is the ego's transformation from tyrant to guardian. And when the ego takes this new role, the fear of the shadow dissolves. You realize she was never the enemy. She was the keeper of the fire, waiting for you to prove that you could hold it. But the question remains, When the shadow stands before you, holding out the truth you once feared, will you take it with open hands, or will you let it slip back into the dark? There is a silence that follows the moment you accept the shadow's gift. It is not the silence of absence, but the silence of a room after a storm when the air feels charged, the ground is damp, and every leaf is still trembling. In that silence, the mind reaches for the familiar, the comforting narratives, the rehearsed explanations, but they no longer fit. They crumble in your hands like ash. What replaces them is not yet clear. This is the most dangerous point of transformation, for here, the temptation to retreat into the old self is strongest. The ego offers its bargains. It whispers, "We can keep some of this truth, but not all of it." It negotiates for partial awakening, promising you the safety of the old world if you agree to hide certain pieces of yourself. This is the voice of the half-life, the existence where you know too much to be blind but still choose the comfort of shadowed corners. Many accept this bargain, but those who walk fully into sovereignty do not. They understand that partial truth is still a form of captivity, and captivity, no matter how comfortable, is not freedom. The shadowed flame archetype burns brightest here. She does not allow you to linger in the doorway between your old self and the one you are becoming. She forces you to step into the light of what you have seen. This step often costs relationships, opportunities, and identities you once thought were permanent. But it also creates space for connections built on truth rather than performance, for work aligned with purpose rather than image, for self-love rooted in authenticity rather than validation. And yet the cost is not just external, it is internal. You must learn to sit with the parts of yourself you once exiled, the envy that revealed where you felt powerless, the bitterness that hid unspoken grief, the desire that was labeled dangerous, selfish, or shameful. These are not flaws to be purged, but signals. Each one points towards something the ego was too fragile to face. When you treat them as messengers instead of enemies, they lose their power to control you in secret. This is why Jung spoke of the shadow as containing not only what is dark, but what is light and gold. The qualities you admire in others but feel you cannot embody: courage, sensuality, creative fire, uncompromising self-respect. These, too, are often locked away in the unconscious. The ego fears them because they require risk. To live with courage, you must face rejection. To live with sensuality, you must risk disapproval. To live with self-respect, you must refuse what you once accepted. The shadow protects these qualities until you are strong enough to bear their consequences. The transformation is rarely dramatic in its outer form. There is no trumpet announcing your sovereignty, no sudden applause. More often, it is a quiet refusal. The refusal to answer a call that drains you. The refusal to explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you. The refusal to participate in conversations that diminish your spirit. These refusals are the architecture of your new life, each one a stone placed by your own hand. But to those who have not yet met their shadow, your silence can feel like a threat. They may push harder, demand explanations, try to lure you back into the patterns that once defined you. The ego in them senses that if you can leave the prison of performance, they could too, but they are not ready. Your presence becomes a mirror they cannot look into without seeing the cracks in their own masks. The shadow does not require you to fix this for them. She teaches you that your role is not to drag others into the light, but to stand in it yourself without apology. This is where your power becomes magnetic, not because you seek to attract, but because you are rooted in something unshakable. And in that rootedness, you discover that the truth you once feared is not heavy at all. It is light. Yet the question remains, when you feel the pull of those old patterns, will you choose the silence that protects your sovereignty or the noise that protects your ego? There is a strange kind of grief that comes when the ego finally breaks. It is not the grief of losing someone else, but of losing a self you once thought was you. This grief is heavy because it asks you to bury not only your illusions, but the identity you built around them. The woman who smiled to avoid conflict. The one who stayed silent to keep the peace. The one who bent herself into shapes that pleased others while killing her own fire. These selves do not go quietly. They cling to you with memories, with old instincts, with the pull of familiarity. But grief is also a gatekeeper. It does not let you enter your new life without honoring what came before. To skip this mourning is to drag the dead into the realm of the living, where they will decay in your hands. So you must sit with them. You must remember the moments they saved you, because those masks were not born from weakness but from necessity. They kept you safe when you did not have the strength or freedom to live without them. The shadow knows this. She honors their service even as she lays them to rest. The shadowed flame understands that this burial is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of liberation. The ashes of your former selves feed the soil where your sovereignty will grow. But like all gardens, it needs time. The ego will try to rush you. It will insist that you move on, that you distract yourself, that you fill the space with anything but stillness. Do not listen. It is in the stillness that the alchemy happens. It is here that the scattered parts of you begin to gather around the truth like iron to a magnet. And what is that truth? That your worth was never given to you, and so it can never be taken away. It was never in the hands of the lovers who left you, the friends who betrayed you, or the family who could not understand you. It does not exist in their approval, their attention, or their forgiveness. It exists in the simple, unshakable fact of your being. This truth is terrifying to the ego because it makes every bargain it ever struck irrelevant. It means you are no longer dependent on the currency it trades in. The shadow protects this truth with a ferocity you cannot imagine until you feel it. She will burn bridges you thought you needed. She will remove people you thought you could not live without. She will strip you of false comfort and drag you into the wilderness of your own soul. It is only there, away from the noise, that you can hear the voice beneath the voice, the one that does not ask for permission to exist. This is why those who have faced their shadow often carry a different kind of presence. There is a weight to them, a groundedness that is not loud but undeniable. They do not rush to fill silences. They do not explain themselves to the unworthy. They do not seek to control what does not belong to them. This composure is not arrogance, it is alignment. It is the natural state of one who has stopped running from themselves. For some, encountering such a presence is intoxicating. For others, it is unbearable. Those still ruled by the ego may try to provoke you, to find a crack in your armor to pull you back into the old dance. But when you stand rooted in the truth the shadow has revealed, their efforts fall into the air like pebbles thrown at a mountain. You do not need to defend yourself, not because you are untouchable, but because you no longer confuse attack with threat. And yet this state is not permanent without practice. The ego is cunning. It waits for moments of exhaustion, loneliness, or longing. It waits for a night when the silence feels too loud or a morning when the mirror feels like an accusation. It will offer you old comforts dressed as new solutions. And in those moments, you must remember, the shadow is not an enemy to overcome once, but an ally to meet again and again. So the question stands like a flame in the dark. When the ego returns with its bargains, will you choose the fire of the shadow's truth, or the cage of its illusions? To choose the fire of the shadow's truth is to accept that freedom will cost you everything that is not real. The shadow will not negotiate with illusions. She will not bargain for partial awakenings. Her work is total, and it is often ruthless. She strips away the ornaments you once thought were your identity, the roles you played, the stories you told, the names others gave you. What remains is raw, unadorned essence, and for many, that nakedness feels unbearable. Yet this is the soil where all authentic power is born. Power born from essence does not operate the way the ego's power does. The ego's power is conditional, reactive, always seeking fuel from outside itself. It feeds on status, attention, and comparison. The shadow's power is quiet, internal, and self-sustaining. It does not rise or fall with the opinion of others. It moves with the certainty of a tide, unhurried and unstoppable. When a woman carries this kind of power, she does not need to announce it. It enters the room before she does, and it lingers after she leaves. This is why the shadowed flame is often misunderstood. Those still trapped in ego will mistake her restraint for coldness, her boundaries for hostility, her solitude for loneliness. They cannot fathom that she is not avoiding connection. She is protecting the sanctity of her inner kingdom. This protection is not built on fear, but on reverence. She knows the worth of what she carries, and she will not allow it to be trampled by those who cannot see its value. And yet, she is not untouchable in the way the ego imagines. The ego fears vulnerability, but the shadow understands that true connection can only exist through it. The difference is that she no longer offers that vulnerability recklessly. She offers it like a sacred gift, to those who have proven their ability to hold it without exploitation. This discernment is not about building walls, but about creating gates that open only to those who meet her at the same depth she holds for herself. The more she lives from this place, the more she becomes immune to the subtle manipulations that once bound her. Compliments no longer sway her when they come with hidden strings. Criticism no longer wounds her when it reveals more about the critic than about her. Abandonment no longer terrifies her because she has learned to remain with herself when all others leave. This is the secret the shadow protects, that the deepest safety you will ever know is not in another's arms, but in your own unwavering presence. It is here that the archetypal work of individuation becomes more than a concept. Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole by integrating the parts of ourselves we once rejected or repressed. But in lived experience, this is not an abstract journey. It is a series of choices made in the heat of emotional fire. Do you speak when your voice shakes, or do you swallow your truth to avoid discomfort? Do you stay where you are diminished, or do you walk away without knowing what awaits you? These moments are where individuation is forged, and the shadow stands beside you in each one, whispering the truth the ego fears. You are enough without their approval. Still, the path is not without its trials. The more you claim your truth, the more you will see the fragility of those who cannot yet face their own. Some will try to shame you for what they cannot understand. Others will withdraw because your light makes their shadows too visible. You will be tempted to dim yourself to keep the peace. But every time you choose to stand fully in your truth, you send a silent signal to the world. This is the standard now, and it will not be lowered. The shadow knows that this stance will cost you certain relationships, opportunities, and comforts. But she also knows what you gain in exchange: the clarity to see who truly belongs in your life, the peace that comes from alignment, and the unshakable joy of living without pretense. This joy is not loud or performative. It hums beneath the surface, steady and constant, even in moments of solitude. And so the question deepens. When the world asks you to shrink for its comfort, will you remain loyal to the truth the shadow guards, or will you betray it for the illusion of belonging? The shadow does not beg for allegiance. She waits in the dim corners of your awareness, patient as stone, knowing that the moment will come when the weight of your own compromises becomes unbearable. That is when you will hear her more clearly, not as a threat, but as a summons. She will not speak in grand declarations. She will simply reveal the gap between the life you live and the life that is truly yours. In that gap lies the ache that no distraction, no relationship, no achievement can numb. For the woman who has met this moment, there is no going back. Once you have seen the truth, the mind may try to forget it, but the body will not. The body remembers the tension of pretending, the heaviness of false agreements, the subtle self-betrayals that pile up like dust in the corners of the soul. This memory will rise again and again, pulling you toward the threshold where the shadow waits. To cross that threshold is to choose authenticity over approval, a choice that feels like a small death because it is. It is the death of who you were told to be. The ego resists because it fears what will be lost. It fears the silence that will follow when the noise of validation fades. It fears the loneliness that might come when the familiar faces turn away. But what the ego cannot see is that this silence is not emptiness. It is space. Space for the voice you silenced. Space for the desires you buried. Space for the self you abandoned to survive. And within that space, something ancient begins to stir. Not a new self, but the original one, the one untouched by the performance of worthiness. The shadowed flame carries this knowing like a lantern. She has learned that the truth she guards is not a weapon to be brandished, but a fire to be tended. This fire does not consume without purpose. It burns away the illusions that keep you small. In its light, you see the games of the ego with ruthless clarity, the subtle ways it bargains for love, the false humility it wears to be acceptable, the self-doubt it manufactures to keep you dependent on the approval of others. Once seen, these games lose their power, and the energy they drained returns to you. This return of energy is where sovereignty begins. Sovereignty is not about control over others. It is the refusal to be controlled by the shadows of your own unconscious. When you are sovereign, you no longer mistake attachment for connection or attention for love. You no longer participate in the silent contracts that demand you abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable. Instead, you choose where to place your time, your voice, your body, and your heart with deliberate care. The world will notice this shift, and not everyone will respond with celebration. Some will see your sovereignty as a rejection of them, because they have built their sense of worth on your compliance. Others will be drawn to you with an intensity they cannot explain, because your presence awakens something they have forgotten in themselves. This is the paradox of the shadow's gift. It disrupts and it magnetizes, often at the same time. The question is whether you can stand in that magnetic field without bending to either flattery or fear. To do so requires a deep intimacy with your own shadow, not the projection of darkness onto others, but the willingness to sit with the parts of yourself you once exiled, the envy you pretended you never felt, the rage you swallowed to be good, the hunger for freedom you called selfish. These are not enemies to be destroyed. They are parts of you waiting to be reclaimed and integrated. When you bring them home, I no longer need to sabotage you from the dark. They become allies, each holding a piece of the wholeness you seek. And yet this reclamation is not a single act. It is a practice. You will meet new layers of shadow at every stage of your life, each carrying a truth the ego has not yet been ready to face. The more you welcome these truths, the more resilient you become. Resilience here is not the absence of pain, but the capacity to remain rooted in yourself even as the winds of change howl around you. So the question sharpens. When your next shadow rises, will you run from it as the ego commands, or will you turn toward it and let it lead you deeper into the truth it protects? There comes a moment when the shadow no longer feels like an intruder but like a mirror. In her reflection, you see the contours of the self you abandoned to survive, the sharp lines of your desires, the wild edges of your instincts. She shows you the parts you disowned not because they were wrong, but because they were dangerous to the fragile peace the ego built. The peace of people-pleasing, of silent compliance, of carefully calibrated charm. The kind of peace that rots you from the inside, while the world applauds your grace. The shadowed flame knows that the ego confuses this peace with safety. But safety built on self-erasure is a cage, no matter how beautiful the bars. You can hang flowers on the walls, paint them with gold, fill the air with sweet words and praise, but the truth will hum beneath it all, low and steady, like a storm in the distance. And the storm will come. It always comes. When it does, the first thing to shatter is the illusion that you can keep both your authenticity and the approval of those who benefit from your silence. The two cannot coexist for long. Choosing authenticity means watching some doors close, doors you once begged to open. But it also means discovering new ones you could not see from inside the cage. These doors are not offered freely. They open only when you stand in your truth without flinching. The woman who walks through them feels both the terror of loss and the intoxication of freedom. Her voice no longer trembles when she names her boundaries. Her presence no longer bends to make others comfortable. She has become the kind of woman who makes the ego nervous, because she cannot be manipulated through shame or seduced by the illusion of conditional love. In her presence, the old games lose their allure. This is the point where attraction dynamics shift. Those who once held power over her through charm, withholding, or subtle dominance find their tools blunt and ineffective. The man who once relied on her need for validation feels unsettled when she no longer performs for his attention. The friend who fed on her endless emotional labor grows cold when she no longer plays the caretaker. The family member who expected loyalty at the cost of her truth calls her ungrateful. These are not signs of failure. They are proof that the ego's old contracts are being burned. The fire that burns these contracts is the same fire the shadow tended in the dark. It is not rage for the sake of rage. It is the sacred anger of reclamation. This anger does not destroy at random. It clears space. And in that space, she plants the seeds of a selfhood that cannot be uprooted by someone else's disapproval. She understands now that the shadow was never her enemy. The shadow was the guardian who kept her truth alive until she was strong enough to claim it. But claiming it is only the beginning. The ego will still whisper. It will tell her she is being too much, too intense, too difficult. It will tempt her with the comfort of the old cage. It will try to convince her that the cost of sovereignty is too high. And in those moments, she must remember the feeling of her own voice filling her lungs, the sensation of her own spine holding her upright, the quiet certainty that she belongs to herself. In this belonging, she becomes untouchable in a way that cannot be faked. Not untouchable because she is cold, but because she is rooted. Those who meet her now must meet her as an equal, not as someone who can be molded, diminished, or owned. This equality is not negotiated. It is felt in the way she carries herself, in the way her no is as sacred as her yes. And yet, there is a deeper truth the shadow holds still, one she will not give away all at once. A truth about why the ego fears her so much, and why the final step into wholeness requires something even more terrifying than independence. Are you ready to hear it? The truth the shadow guards most fiercely is this: sovereignty is not the end of the journey, it is the threshold. Independence can still be a fortress for the wounded, a place to hide while calling it freedom. The ego will happily trade the chains of dependence for the armor of self-reliance, convincing you that solitude alone equals wholeness. But the shadow knows that true wholeness requires a step beyond safety, into the wild and unpredictable terrain of intimacy without self-abandonment. This is where the ego panics, because intimacy without control means allowing yourself to be seen not only in your light, but in the trembling, unpolished edges of your being. It means letting someone witness your desire, your grief, your hunger for connection, without using charm or performance to manage their perception of you. It means standing naked in the gaze of another's truth and refusing to shrink, even when that gaze threatens the self-image you've worked so hard to protect. The shadowed flame knows that for many, this is where the real collapse happens, not in losing a relationship, but in losing the illusion of control over how you are perceived. The ego clings to masks because it believes they keep love from slipping away. But the shadow whispers that the only love worth keeping is the kind that can look into your depths and remain. And that kind of love cannot touch you while you are still dressed in the armor of performance. So she tests you. She brings people into your life who ignite your longing and trigger your defenses all at once. She watches how quickly you retreat into silence when you feel misunderstood, how easily you reach for detachment when your vulnerability feels too exposed. She is not punishing you. She is showing you the fault lines where the ego still rules. To walk beyond the threshold, you must risk what the ego fears most, that someone will see you fully and still choose to walk away. And when that happens, because at some point, it will, the shadow waits to see if you will make the ancient mistake of collapsing your worth into their rejection, or if you will stand, unshaken, and understand that their leaving does not take your truth with them. This is the paradox of the awakened feminine. She can open fully without losing herself, and she can let go without closing her heart. She no longer bargains for love with pieces of her soul. She no longer hides her shadow to keep the peace. She no longer accepts the kind of attention that demands she shrink. And because of this, her connections are rare, not because she is unworthy, but because few can stand in the presence of a woman who refuses to betray herself. The man who can stand there, who does not flinch from her shadow, is not intimidated by her boundaries and does not need her to dim. That man has faced his own darkness. He has met his own shadow and lived to tell it. With him, there is no need for masks. There is no fear of collapse because there is nothing false to protect. But even here, even in this sacred meeting, the shadow still watches. Because love without self-betrayal is a choice that must be made every single day. And it is in this daily choosing that the ego's final grip begins to weaken. Not through grand declarations, but through the quiet, relentless act of being exactly who you are, even when it would be easier to pretend. But there is one last truth the shadow has yet to reveal, a truth that shifts not only how you love others, but how you love yourself. And once you hear it, there is no going back. Do you want to know what it is? The final truth the shadow protects is that love, in its purest form, is not an exchange. It is an overflow. The ego, built on survival, treats love as a transaction, a measured trade of value for value. It calculates, bargains, and withholds, believing this is the only way to avoid loss. But the shadow knows that such strategies may preserve safety, yet they will starve the soul. True love does not arise from need or scarcity. It blooms from the abundance of a self that is already whole. This is why the shadow pushes you toward the deepest wound, the one that taught you had to earn love. It is not enough to understand the wound intellectually. You must feel it in your bones, in the way your chest tightens when you are misunderstood, in the way you second guess your worth when someone withdraws. The shadow insists you stop numbing this pain and instead sit with it until the truth breaks through. Love cannot be taken from you because love is not theirs to give or take. It flows from the center of your being, unbound by approval or absence. When this realization settles in, something profound shifts. The compulsion to chase dissolves. The hunger to prove yourself fades. The craving for constant reassurance quiets into stillness. This is not detachment, it is sovereignty. And from here, the love you offer another is not a plea for completion, but a gift freely given, untainted by fear of loss. This is the kind of love that terrifies the unhealed because it cannot be controlled, manipulated, or earned. The shadowed flame becomes a force of nature in this state. Her presence is both invitation and challenge. She will not soothe an ego that seeks dominance. She will not play the role of savior for a man afraid to face himself. She will not hide her light to make her shadow less to those who cannot bear the sight of it. She loves without binding, gives without depleting, and leaves without bitterness when a bond no longer honors her truth. And here lies the paradox. This freedom does not make her untouchable, it makes her profoundly capable of connection. Because she is not afraid of the ending, she can fully inhabit the moment. Because she does not fear collapse, she can stand in the fire of intimacy without flinching. Because she does not need love to prove her worth, she can love more fiercely than ever before. But the ego does not die quietly. Even in this awakened state, it will whisper old fears, that giving without bargaining will leave you empty, that loving without control will lead to betrayal, that standing in your truth will drive others away. And perhaps some will go. Yet the shadow reminds you that only those unable to meet you in your fullness will fall away, and that their absence is not loss but clearing. There is still one more test. It comes not from the outside but from within. It asks whether you will extend the same fierce, unconditioned love inward, whether you will hold your own heart when it falters, whether you will stand by yourself in the moments when the world offers no reflection of your worth. Because if you can do this, then no rejection, no abandonment, no silence will ever again have the power to collapse you. The question is, when that test comes, and it will you recognize it for what it is?